Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. A few people are still entering from the waiting room, but we're so happy that you're all here. I'm Sheila Katz, CEO of National Council of Jewish Women, and today we're looking at the Biden administration's landmark plan aimed at addressing a growing issue and maybe one of the oldest issues in our country, the deliberate attacks on Jewish people in the form of anti-Semitism. It really is a scary time to be Jewish in America. I don't need to tell any of you, and the work that you're doing every single day. We see and experience anti-Semitic hate speech and acts rising in our communities and in alarming rates in the spaces we work and the communities we're in. And I do want to say, just on a personal note, when I read the plan that I hope you all read page to page, all 60 pages of it, I teared up. This really is a historic moment for any administration to release a plan to counter anti-Semitism, and the fact that it is this comprehensive with 100 acts that federal agencies have committed to take and 100 calls to action for civil society is just beyond what I could have imagined when many of us sat together a while back to think about what this could be. And so obviously, if we're going to sit and talk about this with anyone, we had to get the best of the best. And Ambassador Lipstadt knows that I said this, but during the plan when we were consulted, you know, in addition to giving a long list of what NCJW wanted, we said, you should do whatever Ambassador Lipstadt tells you to do, because she's the secret weapon to making everything happen in this administration. I've known Ambassador Lipstadt for a long time, from when she was a professor at Emory. She's a leading historian, academic, and author. We supported her nomination in this role because we knew she was the absolute best person for this job, who was going to represent us well and push for a world that's safer for Jews everywhere. And we have been just in awe of the work that she's been doing since taking this role. So welcome, Ambassador Lipstadt, and thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you for the support, both public and off the record support. When you tell them just do what Deborah says. Someone in my office said we should have T-shirts made up like that. I said that would go over very well with my siblings, but I really appreciate it. I appreciate National Council of Jewish Women, and I'm delighted to be here, and we can jump right in and talk about the report or what it entails. Maybe I should talk about some background on it. Some of you were present, I think it was back in October, on the Summit Against Hate. And at that point, I spoke with Ambassador Susan Rice, who was then head of the Domestic Policy Council, about some sort of report. Because here's what had happened. When this office was first created, some of you knew Hannah Rosenthal and others. Hannah was one of the earliest occupants. There were no other special envoys. And then over the course of time, other countries began to establish special envoys. And just a couple of years ago, there was a call by the special envoys for each country to have a national plan. Well, the EU rolled out an amazing national plan on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. Germany published one just the beginning of this year. In fact, it came out when the second gentleman and I were in Germany for meetings. Austria had a plan. Many countries had a plan. And we, who used to be the only one with a special envoy and now raised to an ambassadorial level position, didn't have one. And the second gentleman became deeply involved in this, passionately involved. He reached out to me, we spoke, we talked a lot. We planned to travel together. And those combination of forces prompted the White House to, while it thought it was a good idea, to actually take the bull by the horns. And when I heard that they were planning to roll this out in 4 or 5 months, I said, oh my God, it took Germany a year, it took this country 18 months, whatever. But as many of you probably know, when the White House and the National Security Council and the DPC, Domestic Policy Council, put their mind to something, it happens. Many of you were involved in the talking sessions. I know Sheila was involved in quite a few of them, and in the initial, I think, rollout or the initial rollout of the plan in the Indian Treaty Room back in December. So people put their whole bodies into it. When you saw them the week after it rolled out, they looked spent, because they had to figure worked hard on this. I'm reluctant to correct the man who nominated me, our president, Joe Biden, but in his introductory remarks to the rollout, he said this is the most comprehensive plan, ambitious and comprehensive plan the United States has ever put together. Well, he was wrong. It's not only the most ambitious, it's the only plan. It's the first plan. That's not to say that our government and presidents from both sides of the aisle haven't reacted strongly to anti-Semitic incidents. When there have been tragedies or whatever, whether it's a Pittsburgh, a Poway, something that happens overseas, they have spoken out, and they have spoken out strongly. But never has the White House or any other federal agency said, how can we address this issue? How can we be proactive? How can we take the proverbial bull by the horns? And this is what that was. And the White House marshaled over 24 agencies. Yes, the usual suspects, Department of Justice, Homeland Security, Counterterrorism Bureau, FBI, all sorts of police enforcement bureaus, of course, education. Of course, they were at the table, but so was FEMA. So was the Department of Agriculture. So was the Smithsonian. So was the Library of Congress. What can we do within our purview to counteract anti-Semitism or to foster Jewish life? I mean, it's not the government's job to be fostering a religious life, but how can we remove barriers that might be inadvertently there, not necessarily because of anti-Semitism? When there's a welfare program, a food program, and there are lists of snacks or various things that one can purchase, is there kosher food on it? Rural communities who don't have that much contact with Jews, how can we possibly foster a conversation there? When the Smithsonian, those of you who are in Washington know, and each summer the Smithsonian takes over the mall, I guess for about a long weekend, it's not quite a week, and there's a Jewish Life Festival. Are Jews represented? So the Smithsonian is now working with the Council of American Jewish Museums. There's so many wonderful American Jewish museums to develop those kind of plans. My own office began to work and is working on a comprehensive evaluation of best practices in other countries. What can we shamelessly steal or emulate from other countries? So this is what we're doing. And Susan Rice was quite direct when we had one of our first meetings with all the agencies around the table. She said, don't send me the same old stuff. You know, don't take an intern and say, find something interesting for us to do. She said, I'll send it right back. And as far as I know, that did happen, so that this really was to be cutting edge. And as Sheila said in her very gracious introduction, there are over 100 policy proposals with dates on when they are to be completed. They may not meet exactly those dates, but in other words, when you have a date there, it's not suggesting, oh, this is a nice thing, we're committed to doing this sometime in the future. But we have a date and we're going to commit to do it. My last word of anecdote of introduction was last late Friday afternoon. Shabbat starts very late. In fact, it was the longest Friday or the longest Shabbat of the year in the sense of starting the latest, because it was just the beginning of the summer equinox. I was in a very nice restaurant right near my home, and suddenly the door opened. I've gone there with friends for, they have a good happy hour, and we said, well, we'll usher in Shabbat with a happy hour, and then we'll all go home and light candles and make kiddush and go to bed. And sure enough, this is often the case in Washington. You saw a security detail walk in, 2 or 3 burly kind of guys with things in their ear. We knew someone was coming, and then followed shortly there, following them was Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. So he went up to the counter to place his order. He wasn't with anyone. He was one time talking on his phone, but most of the time he's just standing there waiting for his takeout order. So friend said, go and say hello. You know, he'll be happy to meet you. So I went up to him and I said, hello, Mr. Secretary. I'm Deborah Lipstadt. I am. And before I got the next sentence out, he said, oh my God, it's such a pleasure, such an honor to meet you. And then this is why I'm telling you the story. Then he said, and we are fully committed to fulfilling our obligations. and we had a wonderful chat. And then we were taking a picture, and he said, "Oh my God, it's Friday. It's almost Shabbat. It's Shabbat. Can you take a picture?" I said, "Look outside. It's still bright light. We got a couple of hours." But
Amazing,
he has a
amazing.
very interesting history. If you don't know his history, it's worth Googling. Ashkenazic Sephardic, Cuban refugee, and a mother whose family escaped from the Holocaust. In any
Yeah.
case, so there really is a excitement, there really is a seriousness about this. If you've seen the report, it's downloadable. Maybe one of your staff, Sheila, can put the link, the whitehouse.gov. Yes, it is 60 pages, but it's very readable and very invigorating. It has and exciting. Sheila, when I read one of the final drafts of the report, I happened to have read it in Morocco. I was in Morocco on official visit. I got up early one morning, and it was a beautiful place where they had put us right on the water. I was hoping to go for a walk. Instead, I sat on my porch reading the domestic strategy. And at first I was annoyed. I had 2 hours free in the whole day, and this is what I was doing. But then as I read it, I got, as they used to say on Saturday Night Live, verklempt, thinking that our government had taken on this way in this issue, this horrible issue, in such a comprehensive fashion. It's worth reading. It will make you very proud, irrespective of what your politics are. It will make you very proud that this is your government at its highest levels.
I
There are
agree.
4 pillars.
Well, let me just chime in really quickly, Ambassador
Okay,
Lipstadt.
you know what? Let me stop here and let me take questions, okay? Because
Well, no, I'm gonna go exactly where we were just going and explaining the pillars. I just wanted to pull out, and we put this in our statement after the report came out, that obviously what's there is so critical, and we'll jump into it in just a moment. But as you were explaining how it came to be is also really important. And in Judaism, we talk about tzedek, tzedek tirdof, and justice, justice you shall pursue. We talk about it as a guiding value for us. And we like to say the reason justice is there twice is because, yes, we have to pursue justice, but we also have to pursue justice in a just way. And the fact that Ambassador Rice and you and Second Gentleman Emhoff and the group that came together to pull this together charged each federal agency with coming up with this on their own, and to go through the motions to figure out how to integrate this into their system, to me is just so brilliant. When I first heard about it, I was like, is this going to work? Are people going to do this? But like you said with Secretary Mayorkas, people really took very seriously that they needed to infuse this work into what they were doing and not necessarily separate it out. And that's why I think in reading this, it's so comprehensive and just so wonderful to see. And so thank you for helping people with that. And I guess there are 4 pillars, and I was hoping you might just be able to quickly share.
Let me do it quickly, and let me also share that many of you know Abe Foxman, who was for decades a stalwart fighter against anti-Semitism, still is, no longer at the ADL, but when he listened to the rollout, he texted me afterwards, and he said, it's a Marshall Plan for fighting anti-Semitism. The Marshall after post-World War II plan. It's a comprehensive plan. Are there things that are missing? Of course. Are things that could have been done better? Of course. But it is amazing, and I urge you all to read it. The 4 pillars are increasing awareness and understanding of what anti-Semitism is. And in fact, in my very first speech after I was confirmed, which I gave at the Holocaust Museum, I said that was one of my main objectives, to get people to understand what is anti-Semitism. Most of the people on this call have no problem doing that, but often there is confusion. Second, security for Jewish communities, security for Jewish institutions. Used to be when someone went to Europe and was looking for the synagogue, you'd say to them, get to that block, look up and down the block where you see the police cars, then you'll know that's where the synagogue is. Now we can give the same directions in the United States. I know of no Jewish institution which doesn't have some form of security, whether it's armed guards, whether it's volunteers, whether it's a locked door, whatever it might be. Kids know that to their school, this carpool driver has to identify themselves before they can go in. When they switch to the other school, if they switch or if they go to a non-Jewish school, it's not there. Number three, reverse the normalization of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic discrimination. One of the problems we have, and this of course is less a government issue and more a whole of society issue, is the normalization of anti-Semitism. When rappers, when sports stars, when, I don't know, people who control social media or whatever, engage in anti-Semitism, whether overtly or more surreptitiously, more in a more muted fashion, they make it okay. Kids copy it. And the kid in the middle, I've heard so many stories, not just kids in high school encountering it, but in middle school, where they encounter this and encounter it on a regular basis. And the fourth part is to build communities, coalitions across communities to fight anti-Semitism. One of the things I often say, and Sheila, and I'm sure many people on this call have heard me say, is you can't fight anti-Semitism in silos. You can't fight hate in silos. You can't say I'm only against racial prejudice, but I'm not against anti-Semitic or homophobia or whatever. That doesn't mean that you don't call it out. You call it out specifically for what it is. You don't say, oh, it's hate, everybody should love each other and let's sing Kumbaya, whatever the contemporary equivalent of that is. You call it out as anti-Semitism, and you say, we're going to fight anti-Semitism, and this is anti-Semitic. Then you step back and you put it into the larger picture. So sometimes people forget the first step, and sometimes they forget the second step. And either way, to do only one without the other is not a full way of doing it. Anti-Semitism has its unique characteristics. I've talked about that before. Conspiracy, it's a theory, unlike other hatreds. But again, you can't fight it separately. Next week, I'm traveling to Bosnia-Herzegovina with my counterpart here at State, Desiree Cormier-Smith, who is the special representative on racial justice and equity in our issues of foreign policy, and with Ambassador at Large Rashad Hussein, who is the Ambassador of Intellectual Religious Freedom. We're going to Sarajevo, because it was a city where once Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived together for centuries in harmony, and B, then we will go to Srebrenica for the reburial of the 10,000 Muslim men and boys who were massacred during the war in Yugoslavia when the UN pulled out prematurely. So it's a way of saying, hey, we each have our own areas to fight, but we also understand the necessary for interconnectedness. And by the way, when I was in Auschwitz in January, Ambassador Hussein was there with us.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I think as I'm reflecting on these four pillars, one of the things that I found surprising, which was just an interesting thing as an American Jew to think about this, was that in that first pillar, there was also a lot about celebrating Jewish identity, as you were talking about. I think we're so used to combating anti-Semitism in a reactive way, which we need to do. We need more money for nonprofit security grants. We need to talk about safety and security always. But to actually say one of the ways we address anti-Semitism is by inspiring more joy around being Jewish, and to celebrate Jewish American History Month, and to encourage government agencies and others, the same way we see Pride happening right now, to be talking about contributions of American Jews to our society. When I was reading that, it really took me aback for a moment to say, but of course, we also have to talk about the positive sides of being Jewish and celebrate being Jewish. And that was one of the things I found surprising and beautiful. Was there anything you found surprising in the plan?
Well, I've been saying that for years. As a scholar of the Holocaust, as a scholar of anti-Semitism who has spent much of her career studying it, I often talk about Jewish life as on a spectrum from joy to oi. And so many of us are more comfortable at the oi end, in part because persecution is the great equalizer. It doesn't care how you observe Shabbat, how you observe Kashrut. If you observe Kashrut, it just goes after you because you're a Jew. But if your identity is governed only by persecution, then you have ceded to the oppressor power of your identity. If as a woman, you only feel your sense of womanhood, whatever the word would be, when there's a misogynist around you, the misogynist controls when you feel strong in that. And the same thing can be said for anti-Semitism and Jewishness. I was very pleased to see that there. Whether my continuously talking about it was the reason it was there, I can't tell you, but I certainly know it helped.
As we said, whatever Ambassador Lipstadt says, that's a good
Maybe
thing.
they listened. Who knows?
They did. Tell us. So obviously, we want everyone to read this. We love the deliverables. That was also a surprise for me reading it, that it actually said when the due dates are. Beautiful. And you can count on us to hold people accountable for that. But in addition to the federal agencies, there's about 100 actions, particularly in that last category about building coalitions and community and others, that organizations like National Council of Jewish Women, people on the ground, people connected to Jewish organizations, that people in our country can be taking. What advice do you have for people here who want to help contribute to seeing this plan through? And where do you think they should get started?
I'm going to give advice that's going to sound very, if I'm going to send, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to send, just decline it. I'm going to give advice that it's going to sound very, I don't know, namby-pamby, simple, whatever. First and foremost, use your voice to speak out. Whether it's in the gym, whether it's online at the store, whether it's at a coffee with friends, whether it's in the conference room, whether it's talking to a client, whether it's talking to a professional, a doctor, a whatever, someone who's taking care of you, and they make some sort of crack, and they say something, okay, you can describe it, say something. Now, that doesn't mean you have to jump down their throat, especially if it's the dentist and he's down your throat, that could be dangerous. But and it's hard, but say, you know what? That's an anti-Semitic trope. Oh, it was just a joke, whatever. Well, it may have been a joke to them, but it's not a joke to you. And it's hard to figure out what to say. And sometimes we have the perfect answer. The next 2 o'clock in the morning, the next night, we sit bolt up in bed. And that's what I should have said to her when she said, all Jews are rich, or you're rich, or assumed that we were going on a fancy vacation because we're Jews or something like that. But we have to speak out. We have to use our voice, A. B, in terms of speaking out, a subset of that, for those of you, especially with parents of children at school or grandparents, when the kid comes home and says, I was uncomfortable about something, figure out, think strategically. And National Council is great at training its people to do this, but think strategically. How do I approach the school? How do I get the principal or the DEIA person or whatever it might be to listen and not just say, oh, this is some hysterical parent or grandparent or whatever it might be. How do I make it clear to them? And that goes back to the first pillar, increase understanding of anti-Semitism. So educate yourself. There are many good books on this, some by me, some by others. That I know one, not to mention a recent one, a very short one, Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel. It's British, but it's written from the perspective of someone who is on the left, who is a liberal, who has spotted anti-Semitism there. It's easy to spot it at the other end of the spectrum. Too often we ignore it there as well. And I'm not equating the two, but it doesn't matter. It's not a matter of equating, oh, I'm only going after the worst. Go after it anywhere you find it. So that would be the thing that I would say to people, and educate yourself. And most of all, going back to the point Sheila brought us into this part of the conversation on, don't make it the sum total of your Jewish identity. Don't make that the only message you give to your kids about being Jewish. Impart to them joys of Jewish celebration, celebrating with other members of your community, whether it's Friday night, Shabbat, coming up the not so far away, the Jewish holidays. If it's summer, can Rosh Hashanah be far behind? But mesh that into it too.
We love that, and it's such an important message these days, using your voice, being proud of being Jewish. I think part of internalized anti-Semitism has been learning that it's okay to let some of these things slide when it's not in a particular form of anti-Semitism in which your body is at risk. And so even as NCJW, we turn 130 this fall, and we've really doubled down on combating anti-Semitism. And our formula has been, let's just do the same thing for Jews that we've done for other marginalized groups.
Right. People
We
will speak up. People will speak out about other forms of, I didn't want to make a fuss. I didn't say anything. I remember an incident not so long ago before I came to the State Department of a student who came into my office and said something that one of her friends had said when they were sitting around the table in the cafeteria or whatever. And she said, I didn't want to say anything because might lose her as a friend. And I was thinking, you know what? If this person really believes this, do you want them as a friend?
Yeah. Yeah. And could they be a better friend if you help them get on the path?
That's right.
Right. And so I think
sometimes it's ignorance. Sometimes it's falling prey, P-R-E-Y, to these ancient tropes that have been around so long that people have, take them for granted, take them as truths. A stereotype is just that, a stereotype.
Yep.
And those things must be countered.
Amazing. Okay, so what I heard from this is everybody should read the plan from beginning to end. Everybody should use their voice every single day. Everyone should celebrate all of their identities. If they're Jewish, celebrate your Jewish identity too. More joy, less oi. And to make sure that we're good partners to everyone in our communities and that we stand up for ourselves too. So Ambassador Lipstadt,
I think you got it, Sheila, and let me just play on that last point. We so appreciate it. I personally, everyone in my office, my deputy Aaron Kiak, my entire team, and certainly the White House as well, so appreciates the partnership that National Council has been to us in the preparing of this plan. And you held our feet to the fire. Critiques are good. They mean you're taking this seriously, and we really appreciate it. I guess now go do it.
Yeah, thank you. And we felt, and for everybody who knows that, like, I have this wonderful role in representing you in these spaces, we had a seat at every table in this process. We spoke to most of the people, behind this plan, and we felt heard, we felt listened to, we felt valued, and we're so thrilled with the outcome. And now comes the real hard part of implementing this and trying to make our country a safer place for Jews.
When we rolled it out, those of you who are watching, and you can go to the whitehouse.gov and see that, it's worth watching. The second gentleman, Ambassador Rice, Liz Sherwood, Liz Sherwood Randall, and myself. And when I was the wrap-up, as Susan Rice said, Deborah, you bring it home. And bringing it home, I did something I think that's never been done before from a podium that had the White House placard on it. And I quoted from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Elders, and I said, Lo alecha hamlecha ligmor, velo ata ben chorin levatel mimenu. It's not yours to complete the task, you all know this, but we can't desist from starting it. And if not us, who? And if not now, when? We are the ones, now is the time. Thanks a lot, Sheila. Thanks everyone for joining in. I really appreciate this chance to talk about something about which I am very proud.
Amen. Thank you. We're in this together, and let's get to work, everyone.
Take care. Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you.
I keep telling them to listen to Deborah.
I'm in. I'm putting it on a t-shirt.